Welcome to the debate. Today we are taking a close look at a deeply influential piece of source material, Amoris Lætitia, which translates to On Love in the Family. It is an apostolic exhortation written by Pope Francis.
Yeah, and it is a massive, highly nuanced document. I mean, it really serves as a profound examination of the complexities of modern family life. It addresses everything from the deep theological foundations of matrimony all the way down to the intense sociological, economic, and psychological pressures that everyday households are facing right now.
Exactly. It covers the ground. But there is a profound tension running through the entire text, and that brings us to the central question we are exploring in our discussion today. Does the text's heavy emphasis on the law of graduality, the idea that people move toward goodness in steps rather than all at once, along with its focus on individual conscience and pastoral discernment, fundamentally alter the theological ideal of marriage? Or does it merely provide a new pastoral methodology to achieve an unchanging, absolute traditional ideal?
It is a really fascinating tension to unpack.
It is. I state that the text maintains an absolute, objective, and indissoluble ideal of marriage using pastoral patience merely as a method to guide fallen humans toward this unchanging standard.
And I state that by integrating imperfection, complex realities, and individual conscience into the framework, the text fundamentally shifts the paradigm of marriage from an abstract, rigid doctrine to a dynamic, lived reality.
So, to set the foundation for my perspective, we really have to look at how vigorously the source material defends the traditional, indissoluble nature of marriage. There is just no room here for theological delusion. Early in the text, Francis goes right back to the gospel. In paragraph 62, he notes that Jesus, in speaking of God's original plan, specifically reaffirmed the indissoluble union between man and woman. He states explicitly that Christ restored marriage to its original form.
He does use that language, yes.
And he takes it further. He insists that this indissolubility shouldn't be viewed as some heavy yoke imposed on humanity. It is a gift granted to those who are joined in marriage. The ideal is not a burden, it is a divine reality. And when you get to paragraphs 71 and 73, he elevates it even higher. He calls marriage an icon of God's love. He asserts that the family is the image of God, who is a communion of persons. Marriage in this text is a sacrament that builds up the body of Christ.
Right. He uses very elevated traditional framing in those sections.
He does, yeah. But we also see a fierce defense of this ideal in his sociological critique. The text harshly critiques what it calls the culture of the ephemeral. That's in paragraph 39. It's this modern tendency to treat love like a consumer good, something you subscribe to and then just cancel when you're bored. He warns against an extreme individualism that weakens family bonds. To me, this proves that the document has zero interest in diluting the ideal to accommodate modern trends. It holds the line on the objective truth of marriage, but offers a more patient, grace-focused pedagogy to help imperfect people eventually reach it.
Well, I read the primary intent of this document quite differently. While he does use that traditional language, the text intentionally dismantles the rigid application of abstract ideals in favor of lived complexity. You see the clearest evidence of this in paragraph 36, where the text actually turns its critique inward, criticizing how the institution itself has historically operated.
You mean the critique of how marriage has been presented in the past?
Exactly. He explicitly warns against presenting a far too abstract and almost artificial theological ideal of marriage, far removed from the concrete situations and practical possibilities of real families. He recognizes that this excessive idealization, treating marriage as this flawless, unattainable fortress, has not made marriage more desirable. It has done the exact opposite. People feel alienated by it.
But pointing out a communication problem doesn't change the underlying theology.
It goes deeper than communication, though. Look at how it is further developed in paragraph 122. The text warns against laying the tremendous burden of perfectly reproducing Christ's union with the church on two limited human persons. Instead, it redefines marriage as a dynamic process, one which advances gradually. He starts validating the seeds of the word, meaning those elements of truth, grace, and goodness that exist even in imperfect or regular unions. By emphasizing that the church is called to form consciences, not to replace them, the text does something revolutionary. It fundamentally redefines the theology of marriage to include human limitation as an intrinsic component of the sacrament itself, not just an obstacle to be overcome.
So you are saying the imperfection becomes part of the definition itself?
Yes, I come at it from a different way when we examine the function of general rules versus the individual conscience in this text. If we look at the very beginning of the document, specifically paragraphs 2 and 3, we see a profound shift in how authority and rules are supposed to work.
Right, the opening where he discusses the synod and the diversity of issues.
Yeah, the text explicitly warns against an attitude that would solve everything by applying general rules or deriving undue conclusions from particularly theological considerations. It goes on to state plainly that not all discussions of doctrinal, moral, or pastoral issues need to be settled by interventions of the magisterium.
Meaning the central teaching authority doesn't need to dictate every single nuance of family life. Precisely. It acknowledges that cultures are diverse and general principles need to be enculturated, adapted to the lived reality of the people. By elevating this flexibility, the text elevates the individual conscience to a primary theological role. It suggests that the lived reality of families, their cultural contexts, and their individual discernment actually supersede the rigid universal application of doctrine. The rigid rulebook is essentially set aside. In its place, you have a localized, conscientious interpretation of what love requires in specific, complex, incredibly messy situations.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. We have to read those opening paragraphs in harmony with the rest of the text, particularly when he gets into the specifics of freedom and truth in paragraph 34.
Okay, let's look at paragraph 34. The text explicitly states there that we cannot confuse genuine freedom with the idea that individuals can act arbitrarily. He writes, as if there were no truths, values, and principles to provide guidance, and everything were possible and permissible. The freedom of conscience the text champions is not a relativistic freedom where everyone just decides what is right for them.
No, it's not pure relativism. I completely agree with that.
Right. So when paragraph 37 speaks of the need to make room for the consciences of the faithful, we can't ignore the preface. It says we are called to form consciences, not to replace them. The key word is formation. Formation implies an objective standard to which the conscience is being conformed. Think of the conscience like a compass. The text is saying you shouldn't just drag someone to their destination, you should teach them how to read the compass. But a compass is only useful if there is an objective, unmoving true north. In this case, true north is the indissoluble, exclusive ideal of marriage. The individual conscience does not act independently of the objective truths of marriage. The pastoral goal is to patiently educate that conscience so it freely embraces that specific ideal. The general rules still exist as the ultimate compass.
But what happens when people are off the path entirely? That's where the text really pushes the boundaries.
Which naturally brings us to how the text handles imperfect or irregular situations. People living together, second marriages without annulment, situations like that. My position is that the text views these imperfect situations as transitional states. They are states that desperately need the grace of conversion.
Transitional? As in just a stepping stone?
Yes. If we look at paragraph 78, the text says that the church turns with love to those participating in her life in an imperfect manner, but it clearly specifies the purpose of this love. She seeks the grace of conversion for them. The text encourages them to do good and take care of one another absolutely, but the ultimate goal is to lead them to celebrate the sacrament of matrimony. The ideal remains the ultimate necessary destination. Pastoral patience is applied, yes, but the text never suggests that an irregular union is theologically equivalent to a sacramental marriage. It is a state of journeying toward the objective truth. You might be patient with someone in the waiting room, but the goal is still to get them into the sanctuary.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. If you read the entirety of paragraph 78, it doesn't just treat these situations as mere stepping stones or as purely deficient states like a waiting room where nothing of theological value is happening.
How else can you read it if it explicitly calls for their conversion?
Because it also says that when a couple in an irregular union attains a noteworthy stability through a public bond characterized by deep affection, responsibility towards the children, and the ability to overcome trials, this can be seen as an opportunity. That word is critical. That is a massive theological pivot. It is not just saying, we tolerate you until you fix your paperwork. It is saying there is profound, undeniable good happening right here, right now, in this imperfect setup.
But it's an opportunity to lead them to the sacrament.
It is, but that doesn't invalidate where they currently are. Furthermore, look at paragraph 77. It praises anyone who brings into the world a family that teaches children to overcome evil, noting that positive elements exist in forms of marriage found in other religious traditions. It says they will encounter gratitude and appreciation, whatever their religion or region. By recognizing the seeds of the word, these fragments of divine truth, outside the traditional sacraments, the text is validating the inherent goodness of these unions as they are. It suggests the ideal is fluid and adaptable to edge cases. It is no longer a monolithic destination that completely invalidates the theological worth of the journey itself.
That is an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently when we consider the actual demands the text places on conjugal love. We are talking about the reality of what happens between two spouses.
You're talking about the section on 1 Corinthians 13.
Yes, exactly. Spanning paragraphs 90 to 119. If the text were truly softening the theological boundaries or making the ideal fluid, it would not emphasize the incredibly rigorous demands of conjugal love as intensely as it does here. He goes through St. Paul's hymn to love line by line. The text does not lower the bar for love to make it easier for modern people. It demands a love that bears all things and endures all things. Paragraph 118 specifically calls for a dogged heroism.
Dogged heroism is a great phrase.
It really is. It defines it as a power to resist every negative current and an irrepressible commitment to goodness. I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because the text's highly realistic view of marital crises does not serve to excuse failure or redefine marriage.
You're referring to the later chapters on crises, right?
Yes, paragraphs 232 through 234, he talks about the messy, painful realities of two people fighting, growing apart, dealing with immense stress. But he doesn't use that to say, well, the ideal is too hard, let's just change it. Instead, it frames these crises as an apprenticeship to achieve the indissoluble ideal. Overcoming these obstacles allows couples to deepen their bond. Paragraph 231 beautifully notes that love, like fine wine, comes into its own over time. The expectation of ontological permanence, the idea that this bond permanently changes who you are, and that you are meant to grow toward perfection within it, is entirely intact.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered how the text explicitly weaves imperfection into the very fabric of that love? I agree, the analysis of 1 Corinthians 13 is incredibly rigorous, but paragraph 113 makes a crucial theological concession. It explicitly states love coexists with imperfection.
Well, sure. Human beings are imperfect.
Right, but he takes it further. He says that the other person loves as best they can, with all their limits, and that the fact that love is imperfect does not mean it is untrue or unreal. The text systematically dismantles the expectation of ontological perfection within the sacrament from day one. Look at paragraph 218. This is perhaps one of the most practical pieces of advice in the whole document. It tells spouses to set aside all illusions and accept the other as they actually are. And what are they? Quote, an unfinished product needing to grow, a work in progress.
I don't think calling someone a work in progress undermines the sacrament, though. It just acknowledges human nature.
But it represents a definitive shift in the theological emphasis. The sacrament is no longer presented as a static achievement of perfection. The work in progress itself is the actual theological reality of the sacrament. You mentioned the dogged heroism earlier. The heroism you mentioned isn't about achieving an absolute abstract standard of flawless love. It's the heroism of enduring in the messiness, the lived reality. And the text now embraces that very messiness as the true nature of marriage. It's not a bug in the system. It is the system.
To summarize my position in light of our discussion, I look at all of this and see that the source material is a masterful defense of the objective, indissoluble nature of marriage. It doesn't back down from the high calling of the gospel. What it does is uniquely pair this absolute standard with a deeply realistic, patient pastoral methodology. The text recognizes the immense pressures of modern society, the culture of the ephemeral, and the sheer fragility of human beings. But it responds to these challenges not by lowering the theological ideal, but by offering a pedagogy of grace. It is an approach designed to heal brokenness, respect individual conscience, and gradually guide individuals step by step toward the unchanged ultimate truth of sacramental union.
And to summarize my perspective, I see a document that goes much further than a simple change in tone. The text's profound integration of individual conscience, the law of gradualness, and its sharp internal critique of abstract theological ideals proves that the rigid boundaries of the marriage ideal have been fundamentally softened. By recognizing the seeds of the word in irregular situations, elevating localized discernment over blanket rules, and emphasizing that spouses are always unfinished products, the text fundamentally redefines the theology of marriage. It moves it away from an unattainable museum piece to a theology that accommodates, validates, and sanctifies the messy, complex reality of human limitation.
Despite our different conclusions, I think we both acknowledge a shared agreement that the source material displays a profound psychological realism regarding human relationships. It doesn't read like a dry, disconnected textbook. It offers a deep, genuine compassion for the vulnerabilities of modern families, recognizing the economic, cultural, and psychological strains they face daily just trying to keep a household together.
Absolutely. The sociological awareness in the text is undeniable. The author clearly understands what it is like for a family trying to survive the modern world. Where we maintain our continued substantive disagreement is over the nature of this compassion. We disagree over whether this psychological realism represents a mere shift in pastoral tactics, essentially a new, gentler way of teaching an old, unchanged rule, or a fundamental evolution in the underlying theology of what marriage actually is and how it functions in reality.
I believe there is immense value in reading the source material through both of these lenses. Appreciating the true complexity of this text requires engaging directly with its tensions. You really miss out on the richness if you just go to it seeking simple, reductive answers or trying to flatten it out into a single talking point.
I agree entirely. The text invites a very deep, contemplative reading. We encourage our listeners to further explore its rich, practical reflections on daily family life, the nature of love, and the challenges of the modern world. There's so much more to unpack in those pages. As always, we leave it to you, the listener, to weigh the evidence and form your own conclusion regarding today's central debate.
Thank you for joining us for this intellectual exchange.